Right then, hello everybody. Let's see what's going on in the world today. What do we have going on in the world today? Hello everyone. How you doing? So hopefully that is picking up the sound and it's coming through clear. Let's go to this online messaging live chat. Hello Paul from Chicago, nice to see you first. Hello Buccaneer, Calvin Gasberg, Derp Squad, John Shea, hello. Vision, hello! No singing tonight. Ian Carr, hello. Dunrigan Hammer, hello. William Cox, hello. Trevor Ayton, hello. I don't think I've seen you either before or in a while, so hello. Welcome. Blue Shirt Buddha, hello. Lots of people in New York watching me. Hope you have a good day. Jane Liff, hello. Old Richard, hello. Hello, everyone. Albert Zaski, hello. Nice to see you all. How are the graphics? Because I have to admit, what I've done is I've turned down the graphics in terms of their pixel numbers and their refresh rate to see if that stops it stalling so often. Have I seen the Matapan video from Drac? Not today, but coincidentally, that's probably because I'm talking about Matapan today, so I didn't want to see Drac's video because then I might end up talking about what he's talking about Matapan rather than what I need to talk about Matapan, which is HMAS Perth. No, I'm feeling for long, unfortunately. Graphics are very pixelish. Well, as I said, I'm trying this out. If it works well, that's good. Basically, the idea is it works now, and that keeps it going happily until I have the proper computer set up. Voice is a bit too loud. Well, I've been talking on MS Teams all day, so that might explain why that's so loud. I'll turn down the gain and I'll turn down the voice a bit. Hopefully that's better. It seems to be keeping it to about 68%, 69% on the CPU usage, so hopefully that was the idea, that it was the 100% CPU usage which was causing the trouble with the stalling and etc. So, you know. Well, basically my idea is to try this, and then I'll try to see if I can up the graphics and lower the refresh rate. For some reason, the frame rate has gone back up to 30 frames per second. I did have it set for 24, but, you know, hey-ho. And the resolution is stayed at the one it was at. Donald Fritz, I feel like if Dr. C ever got the game ruled away, we would never see him again, as he would be designing the fleets all day. That's basically what happened with Galactic Civilizations 3. For about 3 months, I was designing battle fleets. And then when I played my friends online, they all lost because my ships were brilliant. Afternoon, Jeff Biller. Come goes, it sounds okay. Sorting in supermarket, have to maintain chat silence. Well, okay. Well, hello everyone. I hope you're all having a good time. I am currently halfway through teaching A-level politics for 4 days. So that's been rather fun, which is also why there's been no introduction video, because I do that. I'm teaching that for Justin Craig online. So basically, I'm spending about 6 hours a day non-stop talking to 2 poor students. So if you can imagine me condensed onto 2 poor students doing A-level politics, you feel very, very sorry for them. Carl Harmon, can we expect SBS and Greek Minehunter incident in bilge pumps? You probably will do at a point further along, probably not tomorrow, maybe a bit tomorrow in next week's one, but tomorrow in bilge pumps, we have a really, really special guest. We have an absolutely amazing guest. We have a young academic who hasn't yet finished her PhD. Well, she's submitted it, but she hasn't done the Viva yet. And we're talking about the Falklands War as the first information war. And it's going to be really, really cool. And yeah, I may have some personal reasons that I'm very, very excited to have this particular young academic on. Carmen, I remember doing politics for instead of failing it for the year, then passing the exam and failing the other. But very interesting, it was. Larynx of steel. Well, a lot of this stuff might have gone down today. When did Amphions stop being referred to as Amphions? They were always referred to as Amphions, but they weren't Amphion. Very quickly, they were not Amphion. They were very, very quickly were not Amphion. No, I haven't started yet. I'm just about to start the slideshow. So, Amphions, the Amphion class, modified Leanders. They are some of my favourite ships, really. I love their histories, and the reason there's also not been another introduction is there is going to be a long patrol. Because these are my notes, all 6,000 words of them. So there is going to be a long patrol on these, and it's going to come out during the November research week. It's going to come out. I'm still deciding which week is going to be the November research week. I have a theory, but, you know. What is politics vision? Yeah, that was the question I started them off with on day one. They were not. They were slightly worried about that one. Although I have to admit that Carpers again failed in their delivery duties. This was the last of the regular bottles of Iron Brew I had. Co-op, you know what you must do. It's terrible. Terrible. So, the Amphion class. They are born of the same things that produced the Leander class, in that in the 1930s, the Royal Navy is deciding how to do trade protection. And honestly, they're deciding on what is the lowest tonnage you can use for trade protection. Gahaman, have you heard about the attack in Nice? It's really sad to see France suffering so much terrorism that's coming from Britain. It is sad, and I have heard about the attack. It's not good. It's not good. Anyway. So, getting back to trade protection. The Royal Navy was all about trade protection. As we've been over many times, the Royal Navy has a lot of trade to protect. They have to look after a lot of things. And so, when they are dealing with the world in the 1930s, they're trying to work out how little they can go. How low can they go? And it all starts with HMS Enterprise and that double turret. Here are the Leander class stats. Now, why are the Leander class important? Because how often are the Amphions referred to as the modified Leanders? When actually, in many ways, I would say the Amphions are their own class, because they're the first class of cruisers the Royal Navy looks at putting in the treble 6-inch turret. They always were going doubles for the Leander class because that was the working turret they had. But for the Amphions, they actually do consider the trebles. Which means they're an attempt to go smaller than Leanders in terms of tonnage, but their attempt to go actually more firepower. The idea is to have 2 treble turrets and 2 double turrets, so have 10 6-inch guns. That doesn't work out, and they end up a lot lighter than even they were found, mainly because it's found that putting a treble turret requires a far larger hull. Who'd have thunk it? To have a treble 6-inch turret and the forces it exerts on your ship requires a larger, more heavily built hull. So that might explain one of the reasons why the Town class are quite so strong. And they're quite so heavily built. They have quite such a lot of subdivision. It's because of the need, the real need, to make them as strong as for those turrets as possible. Possibly this is because the Royal Navy had one particular testing site where they'd been testing the gun, and it had managed to split the concrete. We'll leave that to one side, though. So, Leander class stats. Displacement, 7,390 tons in standard. 9,900 tons full. Dimensions, 169.1 meters. Or that's 554 feet, 9 inches. 17.1 meters beam, that's 56 feet. And they have a draft of 5.8 meters, or 19 foot, 1 inches. They're powered by 6 Admiralty free drum boilers generating 72,000 shaft horsepower, which, via 4 shaft-geared turbines, was able to achieve 32.5 knots or 5,730 nautical miles at 13 knots. What's interesting, though, is they have a very traditional cruiser engine arrangement. So that means that a lot of things are next to each other, i.e. if you get a hit with a torpedo, you're likely to have your ship go out of action. Because it's not staggered, it's not in a unit system, it's in all the boilers, all the engine, all the turbine system. Which is why they have only one funnel. Sort of when you go back to it, and when you go to this next one, you can see quite clearly HMAS Leander, which is part of the New Zealand division, along with HMAS Ajax. Or is it Achilles? It's Achilles, HMAS Achilles, New Zealand division. They only have a single funnel. They can do this because they have all the boilers next to each other. Sure, Mac. Now, it suddenly seems a lot less stupid when ships' guns knock out equipment with shock. Yes, they do. And again, it's the guns, it's the things. It's a lot of things which go into this. So I would say, yes, the Leanders are used as a base model, but I would say the Amphions are a further evolution. I wouldn't call them an improved or modified. I would call them an evolution of the trade protection cruiser. And I would argue that the trade protection cruiser then diverts towards the town class type, the larger, more visible, more present, and the Amphion class type. The smaller, more nimble, able to be produced in greater numbers. So, here is the Amphion class stats, and I'm going to make this one big while I talk about them. Mainly because I wanted to have a look at that hull. Notice something. The Amphion class are length is 171.4 meters. They're actually longer. Okay, only by a couple of meters, but they're still longer. They're actually slightly wider with a beam of 17.3 meters. I.e. another 27 meters or 8 inches. And they have a draft which is actually a little bit larger as well. So they're technically bigger ships. Their displacement, though, is 7,115 tons in standard or 9,100 tons in full. That's 800 tons less. They actually have, their armor is actually better. Because of their hull shape, they technically have slightly thicker, slightly more area of the hull covered in armor. But because the engines are now in a unit arrangement, which means one torpedo strike will not take all her power, the outer engines being, this is why this makes them much more survivable. But it also caused them to have to lengthen the armor. Also, it's why they have two funnels. And this is another reason why they have to be slightly longer, to make space within the superstructure, etc., for the two funnels. So she's got two funnels because she has two sets of boilers. She has two sets of turbines. So now if they get a torpedo hit, the worst that'll happen is if it happens amidships, it takes out the turbines for one set of shafts and the boilers for the other set of shafts. So then they need to route the steam, which they have systems for, from the boilers from one set from the other system mechanism. But again, they only have 4 Admiralty 3-drum boilers, and yet they generate the same shaft horsepower rather than 6. They do this because these boilers are actually far more powerful than their predecessors. They're technically the same boilers, but they're higher pressure, and they have produced more power. And that's also why they're able to achieve the same top speed, but they're able to cruise for 7,000 nautical miles at 16 knots. And again, this is also a function of their hull design. Their hull design actually improves their performance for long-range cruising. So these are slightly bigger ships, but lighter ships. Their armament is the same, but as I said, they were considering treble 6-inch guns. They have 4 single quick-firing 4-inch guns for AA defense. They have 12.5 AA machine guns in 3 quadruple mounts, also for AA defense, and they have 8 21-inch torpedoes arranged in 2 quadruple beam launchers. They actually have a very interesting design on the box around the magazines, because what they decided was, instead of having a uniform 3 inches around them, they put 3.5 inches around the areas which are most likely to get impacted, and therefore the areas which need to be thickest, and 2 inches around the rest. And they had 1.125 inches of deck and 1 inch in the turrets. So the deck is actually slightly thicker armor again as well. So they're slightly stronger. Dirt Squad, they are trade protection cruisers, definitely not trade interdiction cruisers. I would say these are starting to bridge the gap, in that the RN is trying to build what would be a trade protection size, or try to build down to a trade protection size, but they're looking for trade interdiction in terms of its range of performance. So, HMAS Amphion becomes HMAS Perth. Now, let me just make sure I have my notes up. Now, she was actually ordered, Amphion was actually ordered, it was ordered in 1932-ish, laid down in 1933, launched in 1934, commissioned in 1936, but she's not sold or acquired by the Royal Australian Navy till 1939. In June 1939, she's commissioned as HMAS Perth. So she spends the first 3 years of her service life as a Royal Navy ship. And she does well. Very well, in fact. She's a very successful ship. In fact, let's change the picture of her while I'm talking about her. She enters World War II and she has success in World War II. She is a very, very viable warship. Of course, she won't survive World War II. In fact, only Hobart will. But she's a good ship. Shormac, the RN using higher pressure machinery. Heresy. It's not high pressure, it's higher pressure. It's still not quite what we call high pressure, but it does provide more power. Ian Carr, treble turrets not used on cruisers for some time to come. The RN keeps considering them. They consider them for the Arrow fusers. They consider them for the Amphion class, and then they build them on the towns. And the towns are really the next big set of cruisers. So it's not really a long time coming. Hello, Greg Sahowski. Hello, King George V. It's an Amphion class, King George V, and you can tell by its double funnels. Old Richard, pause Perth, sacrifice to Dutch ego. To be honest, the Battle of Sunda Strait is, yeah, it's not good. It's really not good. We'll get into that. Schumacher, so just so we are clear, this ship has absolutely no commerce raiding functionality, and our plan is to blockade our enemies because they were just nice enough to stop importing when we went to war. No, this ship would do interdiction. All cruisers could do interdiction. But it's where would you put them? For example, okay. So if I wanted, I can do interdiction of trade with an Amphion class. But if I'm going to do it, I'm probably going to be doing it in places which are further away from the enemy. So if I want to do distant blockading on Japan, then I can do one of two options. I can blockade Japan directly and have my ships really close to it, or I can have a blockade. I can have a cruiser sitting off the Pacific coast or Pacific side of Panama, and every time a ship comes too far out, hello, wait here. And I can have some supply ships sitting in the Pitcairn Islands or something and operating from there. And that could be an Amphion class. You see, the idea is Britain is not after necessarily a blockade as you would imagine it from the Napoleonic era, with all the ships sitting off the coast of the enemy. No, that's going to be too high risk for the ships. You don't have enough carrier air power. You don't have enough fighter, enough air defense. They understand the idea of putting single ships out there wandering around to get interdicted by a massed aircraft is not a sensible thing. So their idea is to stop the trade getting anywhere near. As far as they're concerned, the Indian Ocean will be a blanket. There will be cruisers sitting there. Any trade tries to get through to Southeast Asia or go north, it's going to have fun. The same plan is to have another line in the South China Sea, and then use the cruisers which operating further up as fleet cruisers, as scout cruisers. The trouble is always the middle of the Pacific, between America and Japan. That's the difficult area. That's the area where you need a commerce raiding cruiser. That's where you need a surface raider capability. And that's where the town class are going to operate. Because that's what they're there for. The counties will be with the fleet. Probably the Leanders and the Arrowfusers as well. The Arrowfusers acting as leaders for the destroyers. The C-class cruisers and the town-class cruisers will be doing the commerce role. The C-class and D-class, and possibly the E-class, will be filling in the gaps behind the lines. And the town-class will be going, hello, we're in the middle of the Pacific. Come find us if you can. Okay? That's what it is. Clark considered being nice there and then decided not to. I was nice. In car, were any RM cruisers not either sunk or seriously damaged during World War II? That's a good question. That's a very good question. I'm trying to rack my brains. There is a mental brain is going. There is one. I think it's surprising one gets through quite okay. HMAS Birmingham. Yeah, she does okay. She was torpedoed though, so maybe not. But you know, only gets torpedoed once though, so that's quite good. Yeah, it's a time. Cox, huge radius of action is key in the Pacific. Wonder how the Deutschlands would have done there. I think me and Dan Freeman looked into that when we were talking about if Tsingtao went hot. Jason Sparrow, hello. That is a good-looking ship. She is a good-looking ship. Aviator Enterprise. HMS Enterprise was one of the... Well, she did. I think she did okay. Jebula, was this the common practice? The catapult was removed and replaced by a pair of captured Italian 20mm Breda AA guns, one on each side of the catapult. Ammo supplier question. Well, if you're in the Mediterranean, yes. They landed their aircraft quite early on in the Mediterranean because they didn't need them, really. There was enough land-based scouting aircraft and usually an aircraft carrier wandering around. You don't need your own aircraft, so you might as well land your aircraft and use extra AA. HMS Devonshire, I think, Ian Carr went through war quite well, okay. Possibly. I was asking, Deutschland didn't put a class in the Pacific. River Plate 2.01? It would have been interesting. It would have been interesting. It would have certainly been an interesting thing. But no. So, I have a really cool thing for this. So, this is the Battle of Cape Matapan, and I'm going to tell you it from the perspective of HMAS Perth. And what I'm going to put in immediately here is a thank you to the Naval Historical Society of Australia, where I found this account. And it's a first-person account of the Battle of Cape Matapan. The usual stand to, and then it's to our breakfast, which was very rudely interrupted by an aircraft yellow, immediately followed by air raid red. And much gunfire, but no bombs or torpedoes were dropped, so he presumed, rightly, that they were reconnaissance planes. Less than half an hour later, a message came over the speakers. Several ships, presumed to be enemy, are just in view astern. Stand by for service action in a few minutes. But the message had hardly died when action stations were sounded. No one lost any time in jumping into their place of duty. About 0800 hours, they opened fire with 8-inch, whilst we raced madly to open the range, not wishing to try our 6-inch against their superior armament. Their gunnery at extreme range of about 20,000 yards was far too accurate for our comfort or peace of mind, as our battle range is 17,000. They were straddling the Orion, one of the Leander class, of course. Just before they opened fire upon us, we hoisted our battle flags, with the flag of Australia at the foremast. Everyone cheered that we were fighting under our very own banner. We spent a very uncomfortable hour and a half dodging in and out of range, with the Dagos dropping them everywhere. One just ahead of us, one right in our wake. Our job was to entice them into a trap if we could. We were the baited trap, and now I know just what it feels like to be a piece of the cheese. The Italians kept firing jubilantly at us, whilst we kept just ahead, hoping for our battle fleet to appear on the horizon at any moment. About the middle of the forenoon, the enemy turned away 180 degrees and laid a smoke screen. Round we swept to follow them. Away from the direction of our main force, we had to keep in contact with them at all costs, though it was so unequal for us, and blindly we fell into a self-same trap which we had been luring them. Without warning, we were suddenly startled by 15-inch shells falling all about us. We almost sat upon our tail the way we turned, and with every ounce of speed under a pall of black smoke, we raced the Dagos at their own game. We had blundered into Italy's new class of battleship, Littorio or Vittorio Veneto, 32 knots and 15-inch guns, 10 of them. And that's Vittorio Veneto firing there. We are racing. 4 cruisers and 2 destroyers, and our dustmen did a job well worth doing to make so much smoke and still retain a high speed. The engineer commander opened up all valves, barred a safety valve, which he tied ruthlessly down. The ships at this stage might as well blow up with her boilers as with high explosives from Musso. 2 little birds had suddenly appeared on the most exposed part of the ship, the Breda gun platform. Don Viney CPTI on one of the guns, and he was very perturbed about them, for they appeared exhausted and thirsty. One bird hopped towards a pool of liquid. "Don't drink that, you silly little," said Don. "It's salt water and oil. Don't you know any better than that?" But the bird just gave a cheep, and he was thirsty. He very soon found out his mistake, and Don regarded him triumphantly. "There now, I suppose you've given yourself a bellyache. Serve you right for not taking a notice." Then placed a cup of water on the crane. He tried to persuade it to drink, crumbling small pieces of bread for it. All this time, 15-inch shells were dropping around us, the funnels belching plumes of smoke as we tore through the area at 33.5 knots, racing for our very existence. Don and his little feathered friends were quite unconscious of the terror about us. After about 2 hours of racing, an hour of which had us under fire, we finally got clear away, and after grasping for breath for a few minutes, looked around for the battle fleet. We eventually picked them up at about 1400, and very glad to see them we were, and to creep in under the umbrella of Popper and his big boys. The skipper came down and had a little informal chat with the lads, telling us how badly we had needed our smoke at speed and smoke. The C&C made us to vaith that we had made a perfect cruiser's manoeuvre. That's something, anyhow. We can't do much better than the perfection. We had plenty of air raid reds during the afternoon, but no attacks. Our Fulmars chased them away. C&C ordered a large-sized load of manure for the Dagos to be delivered at dusk, and shortly before sundown, as we idled along serenely as though it wasn't just a routine sweep, and there wasn't such a thing as a hostile fleet within a few miles of us, the sunset painting the usual rider colours, silhouetted against the glowing depths of it, could be discerned 9 specks in the sky, making their way north towards a low misty smudge on the far horizon, which was the enemy making their way home. Not long afterwards, when the afterglow had just died down, a new glow spread to the northward, where a gigantic firework display commenced. The sky was filled with bursting shells and tracer shells from the Bredas and the pom-poms. That lasted for an hour, and when one comes to realise what a job those swordfish pilots had, one has to take off one's hat to them. In the words of our skipper, I think it is the bravest thing a man can do to carry out a torpedo attack on a battleship. They have to fly low and direct at their target, a perfect sitting shot, and press home their attack in the face of terrific barrage of AA fire. It takes iron nerves and determination to do this, and they deserve any luck that comes their way. They certainly came to our rescue in the morning, when they successfully turned the enemy battle fleet from its attentions to us. This night attack was all the more difficult because of the fact that after their attack on the enemy, they had to then fly in the direction of Crete and land on the strange, unlighted and difficult to find aerodromes. This operation was carried out with all success. Squadron leader making the cryptic report to C&C, "Have direct hit or sunk a battleship." After this pyrotechnic display, we, the 7th Cruiser Squadron, were sent ahead to make contact with the enemy. The 2nd and 7th Destroyer Flotilla was also dispatched to attack with torpedoes. The night was dark, with a brilliant display of stars, which to our eyes seemed as bright as searchlights as we crept forward to within 5 miles of the enemy fleet. The sea was like glass, and as we were about to spread out in a 17-mile sweep, we made contact and closed in again as we shadowed them silently. At 23:30 hours that night, was suddenly rent with a dull, shattering booms, and sky was brightened by starshine and flashes of gunfire, spread like sheet lightning in an unholy death-dealing glare. Our battle fleet had opened fire at 5,000 yards range by radar and practically blown 3 8-inch cruisers and 2 destroyers to atoms. Destroyers were then sent in to finish them off and pick up survivors only. C&C told us the boats are to make ourselves scarce and burn fighting lights. All shapes are the same to me in the dark, he made signal. The destroyers picked up so many out of the water that it is thought that half the crew jumped overboard before the ships were actually sunk. One skipper of a destroyer made to the C&C, "Have picked up as many survivors as I can carry, fired all my torpedoes, and now have a battleship to deal with. Will I sink her with depth charges or board her?" It's not known what reply the Admiral made. That, by the way, was unsurprisingly one of the tribal classes. I think it was HMS Nubian which sent that. During the night or early morning, it came over misty, and the enemy scattered and were lost. We lost contact and saw no more of them. Dawn found us some distance from the battle fleet, so C&C made to us come in under the umbrella and enjoy a quiet breakfast after last night's frolic. Very gratefully, we crept under the all-embracing and powerful protection to have a few hours' peace and quietness. The forenoon passed quietly. At 10:30, we passed over the area where the night's battle had been fought. The sea was a mass of oil, and a couple of Cardi floats were picked up with more survivors on. Last night's bag is thought to include Littorio, 15-inch 32-knot battleship, Italy's latest, Polar, 8-inch cruiser, Fine, and Zara, also 8-inch cruisers, and 2 large destroyers of the Maestrale class. With the sinking of these 3 cruisers, Italy has now lost half her total force of these vessels, which consisted of 7 10,000-ton cruisers at the outbreak of the war. Our losses for the entire action, nil. After dinner, we had several air raid alarms, and at 1600 hours, a force of about a dozen Junkers 88 dive bombers carried out an attack upon the fleet. Fighters went up from Formidable, but the Stukas came in on inexorably despite the most terrific umbrella barrage. The sky was a mass of bursting shell, pom-pom tracers, and every other air weapon. It is incredible to watch and wonder how anything can live in it. It succeeded in breaking the attack, however, and the bombs that were dropped did no damage at all. 2 Junkers were observed to crash, and half a dozen bailed out. 2 of our planes were lost. It was a terrific attack while it lasted, but the reception was also warm, and I don't think the Huns liked it at all. They concentrated on the Formidable, and all the bombs that were dropped in her vicinity. One nearly entirely obliterated her behind an immense column of water. It is a terrifying and amazing spectacle. One of our braiders nearly scored a hit. It was a beautiful shot. You could follow the red tracer flashing after the Stuka, which was flying away from our port quarter, and only just skidded around the cloud in time. Another second, if he'd kept on his course, it would have got him. So, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly do. I love there's one project I really have a lot of time for, and that's the Naval Historical Society of Australia. They're always getting these great things together. Okay. Imperative Thrawn should have let Drac know about the account, as he has recently released a video on Matapan. Probably have. I think we've talked about that with him before. It's on the Naval Historical Society. Jenna, did the Hobart not get increased to heavy AA mountings, twin 4-inch in place of signals? I think at certain point she does. Hi, Fron. Hi, Sean. But no. Yeah, I think Drac knows about them. Anyway, the Battle of Sunda Strait. Sunda Strait is one of those interesting battles which really, really shouldn't have happened. Thomas Van der Velde, hello. The thing is, and this is how wars pile up. If Formidable hadn't been damaged off Crete, or Illustrious hadn't been damaged earlier in the war, or Ark Royal hadn't been sunk, or Glorious and Courageous hadn't been sunk, there would have been a carrier available for Force Z. There might have even been a couple of carriers. If you have a couple of carriers and you have the battleships, you probably have had the cruisers combined in with that force to form a fighting task force. Now, would a single carrier or a couple of carriers made a difference to the fate of 4C? I think it would have, because with fighter control and the way the British ran it, it would have broken up the attacks and given the air defence that much of an extra layer of protection, given them that much more security. And I think the attacks wouldn't have reached the critical mass. They'd have had the time to pull back. They'd have also had radar and radio going, so they'd been far more easily able to call for assistance from land-based aircraft, so you'd have had land-based fighters. So you could have had all of those things available. In that case, so this is the thing, is the reason Sunda Strait happens is because that's all that's available. But you can say that's all that's available because of what's happened earlier in the war. And this is the problem. I also have a feeling that if the carriers had been around, the R-class battleships which were in the Indian Ocean would have been probably popping around as well with the task force as anti-aircraft ships, basically loaded with as much AA as they could physically carry and blasting away at anything. The Perths did use their aircraft, Jeff Beeler, when they needed them. They didn't have their aircraft fitted in the Mediterranean, but they're using them for their commerce protection role, and trade protection roles, and anti-commerce radar roles. Previously, earlier in the war, they've been using that a lot. Sunda Strait is, well, it's a battle and a half. Orders were received for the cruisers to sail through the Sunda Strait for Tiltja on Java's south coast. They sailed at 7 p.m. on the 25th of February and set a course west for the Strait, Perth leading with Houston 5 cables astern. At 11:06, a vessel was sighted at 2,300 5 miles range, close to St. Nicholas Point. When challenged, she proved to be a Japanese destroyer and was immediately engaged. The cruisers had met the Japanese invasion force assigned to Western Java. Shortly afterwards, other destroyers were sighted to the north, and the armament shifted to divided control to allow more than one target to be engaged. Despite this, the enemy destroyers attacked from all directions during the action. It was impossible to engage all targets simultaneously, and so they were able to close to very short range. Nevertheless, Perth was to suffer only superficial damage in this phase of the action. At about midnight, it was reported that the cruiser had little ammunition left, so Captain Waller decided to attempt to force a passage south from Sunda Strait. He ordered full speed and turned the ship south for Tropper's Island. Perth had barely steadied on her new course when a torpedo struck her in the starboard side. The captain ordered the crew to prepare to abandon ship. A few moments later, another torpedo struck just forward of the first hit, and Captain Waller gave the order to abandon ship. After 5 or 10 minutes, a third torpedo struck aft, well on the starboard side, followed shortly by another at the port. That's 4 torpedo hits. Perth, which had been heading to starboard, righted herself, then heeled to port and sank at 12:25 a.m. on the 1st of March. Houston, still fighting but ablaze, was also hit by torpedoes and sank shortly afterwards. Of Perth's company of 686, which included 4 civilian canteen staff and 6 RAF Royal Australian Air Force personnel for operating her aircraft, only 218, including 1 civilian and 2 RAF, were eventually repatriated. The remainder were killed during or soon after the action or died as prisoners of war. Captain Waller was lost with his ship. There was an admiral in charge, a Dutch one, and he tried his best. Darman was not the best admiral in the world, but he wasn't a bad admiral. And the ships he was given were not bad ships, but they weren't the ships he needed for the job. They were like Admiral Phillips. He had battleships, he had cruisers. But it's a whole force war, and that means you need a whole force approach. And a whole force is you need destroyers, you need cruisers, you need carriers, you need battleships. Imagine Sunda Strait fought with a carrier battle group, a carrier and a couple of battleships. That would be a very different scenario. Jack Hunter, on the subject of Singapore Straits, how much of a loss was Tom Phillips, the RN? I can't seem to find military written about him outside of his name being mentioned in recording of grinding his death. He is a fairly decent admiral. There are things I disagree with him, and he does have some fights with Admiral Henderson over the years. But he's not. He's not some fit admiral who is not good at his job or not capable. He is quite a capable admiral. He is quite a loss to the Navy, in that if you'd given him a decent task force and he had a chance to learn as much as you can learn under that scenario in war, he would have probably matured into a very, very good admiral. But he wasn't in that circumstance. He didn't have the force and he didn't have the flair you needed for that. You needed someone who was prepared to break the mold and think outside the box in that scenario, and the Royal Navy didn't have a lot of those admirals. Tom Phillips was the best admiral they could find for that scenario at that time, and he wasn't a bad choice. There is no brilliant choice, but it isn't unsurprising that he dies and then Admiral Somerville is, instead of given a rest, is sent out to the Indian Ocean to sort that out. Sean back, because no task force is complete with an R-class that comes along because it was there at time. No, it isn't. R-class battleships get maligned a lot, but actually they turn up and have a lot of fun in World War II. Apart from the one that gets taken over by the Soviets. That one, may she rest in peace. Jeff Elan, why were the Straits to the east of Java not used for escape? Using Sunda ensured contact with superior Japanese forces. Because, honestly, they didn't know. They only have so much information of where they're going and where the Japanese are, and they're having to make the best choices they can with the information they have available at the time. Aviator Enterprise, Jeff Beeler, I think it was too shallow and Japanese had also taken Bali. There were issues like that, but... Yeah. Dan Freeman, fluffy researchers in the seems vexed or excited by something. Or, well, I think a parcel arrived at the door. Shamak, Abda, if they had a few major units, would be scary, but without them, it was just a slaughter of irreplaceable escort cruisers. Unless you're the US, then nothing is irreplaceable. Pretty much. That is the trouble. Abda... Here's the thing. If Abda had been formed earlier, and as I said, if one of those any one of those scenarios had not happened to the Royal Navy's carrier force, so they even had just one more aircraft carrier available in service, then Force Z would have had a carrier. If you'd had Abda form around Tom Phillips, with Carl Dorman as second in command, and battleships, cruisers, and destroyers all formed up, it would have been a mighty force there. Okay, yes, the Japanese would have still probably outnumbered it and outmassed it, but for the Japanese to be sure of being able to beat it, they would have to bring a lot of force down. And that's the point. It would have stretched the Japanese resources. It also wouldn't have been that easy. As I've said before, the things you needed out there were submarines and an aircraft carrier. And some destroyers, and you could have made Singapore very, very nasty for anyone to try and take. I was asking, but the Soviets gave Royal Sovereign back in very good shape, just turrets rusted in place, and you do not want to know what happened to our engines. Royal Sovereign, may she rest in peace, with poor girl. Russian, we'll just have to disagree on whether an Ada flot should have been withdrawn to safety after Singapore fell. I think actually after Singapore fell, Abda is the only force in you can put in the way. And everything's about buying time for Australia to secure its defences. At this point, everything you cannot put things in the context of I am saving this fleet for the future. You're putting this in. You are acting at the time in the mindset of the Japanese are coming. I need to secure myself. I need to secure my protection. Right. Now, HMAS Apollo becomes HMAS Hobart. And she's laid down in 1933 after being ordered in 1932, launched in 1934, and commissioned in 1936. And she's procured by the Australian government in 1938. So she's HMS Apollo for the first couple of years of her life before she becomes HMS Hobart. HMAS Hobart. She was purchased by the Australian government in 1938 with the transfer of the seaplane tender HMAS Albatross to the Royal Navy as part of the tender. So basically, the Royal Navy took HMAS Albatross, very useful for various other things in World War II, as the part of the purchase price and purchase cost for a new cruiser. She's quite useful. Anyway, her battle honours include Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, Coral Sea, Savo Island, Guadalcanal, Pacific, East Indies, and Borneo. She has quite a career. And she's a cool ship. This is a picture from her in 1945. Now, please note, I have cropped and enlarged to try and get that picture that side. So if it looks a bit weird, that's on me. Right then. Admiral Phillips had a reputation as a good administrator, maybe not a good task group commander. I think he could have been a good task group commander, judging by his right. And I have to base it off the writings that he did as director of plans and all sorts of things at the Admiralty. He does have some good ideas. Yes, he butts heads with Henderson over naval aviation and destroyers. But ultimately, I think the reason Henderson wins is Henderson persuades him around to his thinking. So that suggests to me a good mind and a good officer. If he's prepared to listen to the words of another and take them on board and think them through, then that suggests someone who could be a very good officer. So that's why I do a bit of defense of Phillips. Alsasky, also, Dutch civilian authorities believe that their Indies can be kept and wouldn't allow Abda to go. Yes, they did. In Carr, there seems to be no pre-discussion with the Iran about what is to be built for them. There is a lot of discussion with Iran about what's to be built for them, but there's also the thing is that the Australian government keeps changing its mind over what it wants to pay for. So the RN just sort of builds things and goes, and as they're building it, the Australian government goes, "Oh, we'd like that," and the Royal Navy goes, "Fine, take it. We'll build some town class cruisers," because that's the thing. While they're doing this, they're working out, "Ooh, we could build town class. We can build this," and they run them for a couple of years. Yeah. So it works out. It does work out. Now, I have another account, a personal account, for HMAS Hobart, for the Battle of the Coral Sea, or rather what happens after it. She's part of Task Force 74, which is covering the US carriers and providing them with protection to stop them being taken out. And big thank you to my girlfriend and her family for the Iron Brew. Thank you. Oh, there's now an argument going on in the chat about Hobart City versus Kansas City. RAN was supposed to buy quite a few more county class, but than they did, but they went, oops, no money. Lots of things happened with the RAN and buying things. Kind of like the Canadians in buying stuff. Hobart is a fine name for a city and a ship. Other than some people kept calling it a hobo. But we'll leave that to one side. Right. So, going to let you have a nice big picture. After refit, Hobart was based at Dunk Island inside the Barrier Reef, which provided excellent natural torpedo defense and provided an opportunity to stretch our legs ashore and play sport. And this is another account. This is an account by Cyril Rayner, again from the Naval Historical Society of Australia. Do like them. There were several months of dull routine, with 10-day patrols into the Coral Sea, followed by 3-day rests at Dunk or Palm Islands. It's during this period that beer became available from the store ship Mekir, with 2 bottles per day being issued to all hands when in harbour. In March 1943, Task Force 74 was formed, comprising the cruisers Australia, Hobart and Phoenix, 7 US destroyers, plus Her Majesty's Australian ships Arunta and Warramunga. The task force, at last free of the reef, joined that with the 7th Fleet at Espiritu Santo on 16th of July. A few days before this, on the 1st of July, there was a cause for minor celebration as Cyril was promoted to Lieutenant Provisional Royal Australian Naval Reserve. After a patrol to the west of the New Hebrides, which had been clear in weather with slight seas, the flagship Australia, Hobart, and the 3 US destroyers were returning to Espiritu Santo. These ships were in defence watches, 4 hours on and 4 off, and streaming at 23 knots under a zigzag plan. Australia was in the van, followed at 600 yards by Hobart, with the destroyers in a standard anti-submarine screen around the cruisers, one 2,200 yards ahead and the others at 2,700 yards distant, 60 degrees on each bow. On 20th of July, at about 18:45 hours, the sun had set and it was getting dark. The officer of the watch in Hobart, the newly promoted Cyril Rayner, could be well satisfied with his lot, expecting a run ashore the following day with the attraction of seeing American nursing sisters. But there was a mighty explosion. The ship was hit on its port quarter. Machinery went dead, all lighting was lost, and the 60-ton wide turret was lifted off its mount with its guns pointing at crazed angles. The officer's watch urgent calls down the voice pipe to his captain went unheard. The executive officer, Commander James Walton, lay seriously wounded, but the situation was calmed as the normally taciturn First Lieutenant, Lieutenant Commander Christopher Johns, Royal Navy, who happened to be on the bridge at this time, quickly took charge until the captain's arrival. Lieutenant Commander Johns ordered stop engines and action stations, and later made contact with damage control parties to help assess the situation. With the captain on the bridge, permission was obtained to fire star shell to eliminate the horizon, but no contacts were reserved. The engineering staff worked tirelessly in restoring emergency services. The ship, with 2 of its 4 propellers and its rudder blown off in the explosion, and now listing to port, was able to restore some power, sufficient to make headway. Using one propeller at fixed revs and the other at variable revs to provide direction, a speed of about 7 knots was attained. In addition, a large steel cable was placed around the gunwale to help secure the stern section. Casualties resulting from the explosion were 14 men killed, including a young US Navy liaison officer, with a further 16 wounded. The torpedo had missed the after magazine by 6 feet. If it had been penetrated, it is doubtful if the ship would have survived. A later report by the commanding officer of a Japanese submarine, IGO-11, confirmed that she had fired a pattern of torpedoes at the Australian cruisers when at an extreme range of about 10 miles, with a running time of 12 minutes. They were intended for the lead ship, Australia, but only one found its target, Hobart. For unexplained reasons, possibly having no further torpedoes, the submarine retired, and Hobart limped off, supported by screening US destroyers, and next day went through the grim task of committing the dead to the deep. That evening they met with US tugs who assisted the ship in passing through the Bougainville Strait. Early the following morning, 22nd of July, they were able to find the safety of anchorage at Espirito Santo. Hobart was not a lone casualty, with a number of ships suffering similar damage, including two USN cruisers, and surprisingly another near sister ship, HMNZS Leander, which had been badly mauled by Japanese cruisers a week previously. Vital support was soon forthcoming from the repair ship USS Vestal, including the use of the then novel underwater cutting and welding equipment. A USN constructor officer who examined the damage said, "A nip torpedo makes a hole 60 feet by 30 feet, and you are true to pattern." The USN repair group worked tirelessly around the clock, including 10 divers who worked for over a week cutting away, repairing, and replacing torn plating. A board of inquiry was established on board Hobart on 22nd July in the presidency of Captain Harold Farncombe, the ADSC Royal Australian Navy, assisted by two other officers from HMAS Australia. Cyril gave evidence to the inquiry. In summary, the board found the cruiser was in all probability hit by one of a pattern of standard Japanese 21-inch torpedoes fired by an unknown enemy submarine at extreme range, and the remainder of the pattern passed the stern of Hobart. The two cruisers and the three screening escort destroyers, which were all fitted with radar, had no knowledge of any surface contact, and that because of the speed of advance, sonar was ineffective. The officers and men of HMAS Hobart acted appropriately, and the high degree of professionalism, especially that displayed by the engineering and damage control parties, was a great credit and helped save the ship from further disaster. It would take her about a year to get her back in service. Good times. Good times. William Bolton. I'm living in the UK, and I live near Washington and New York. Sir Thompson, 1960. I'm sure the Doctor has been great as always. Come on, everyone. It's always kind of people to like it, and please do like. Hello, Simon Zaleski. And Blaine Fennett. I thought it's bad luck to change the name of a ship. The Royal Navy and the Commonwealth Navies do it regularly, so, you know. There again, only HMAS Hobart survives World War II, so you could say it is bad luck proven, considering two of them actually get sunk. I was asking, it's kind of a tradition, I think. Almost all Australian ships I know are named after cities. Even my favourite, HMAS Wallaroo, is named after a city. Yeah, HMAS Dobolo. There is also Newcastle in New South Wales, so they have an HMAS Newcastle with a different lineage to HMAS Newcastle. Oh, they're good ships. I like this class. I think they are. They try so much, and they do achieve so much. But unsurprisingly, I have 2 pages sitting here on the loss of HMAS Sydney to come up. Hobart is repaired and is around for the surrender of Japan, and she actually is one of the ships sent. She takes an active part in World War II, and she's critical throughout it. In fact, you can say the design is one of the reasons why they survive so well. Hello, Engaging Strategy. Hello. Thank you for joining us. One of the interesting things about the Amphion class is, I think the reason I treat them as separate is because when they are just called as modified Leanders, they get swept in with the Leander class, and everyone just keeps talking about the Leander class and what they do. And they don't look at the differences in performance and differences in capabilities. Their shipboard aircraft, Jeff Beal just asked, was actually very, very capable. They often were fitted with the Walrus and the Supermarine Walrus, the second most common aircraft produced by Supermarine during World War II, and they do a lot of wanderings around, they do a lot of scouting, and they're very useful at finding things. When Perth is spending part of her time Matapan as the flagship for the Australian cruiser squadron and wandering around that part of the world in certain sort of Southeast Asia, she and Indian Ocean and these sort of things, she is very, very good in terms of finding merchant ships which have the improper flags, i.e. they are German or they are other Italian or these sort of things, and they are quickly rounded up. The Royal Navy does a very good role of taking so many, basically taking over the ocean as far as it is concerned in the world. This is one of the things which is often forgotten about what the Royal Navy and the Royal Navy Cruiser Force accomplishes. You have a world which has all sorts of trade going on it. In August 1939, ships all over the world which have Italian flags, German flags, all sorts of different flags. And they belong to these companies. Very quickly, by January 1940, the ocean no longer has those ships going around. If there are ships bearing those flags going around, they are surface raiders. Outside the Mediterranean. And even in the Mediterranean, as we've been over talking about the flotillas of the destroyers and the submarines from Malta, there aren't many. The Mediterranean is not exactly a good ocean, a good patch of water, a good sea for Axis merchant ships to be going through. And this is all done thanks to the cruiser force. So the reason the Royal Navy wanted 50 cruisers, they wanted 70 cruisers, they wanted the cruisers they wanted, the numbers are simple. They wanted those cruisers so they could clear the oceans of any other trade if they needed to. Didn't matter if it was Japan, didn't matter if it was Germany. And by the way, the same happens to the Japanese merchant marine. There are Japanese merchant ships in Africa before war begins. There are Japanese merchant ships in South America before war begins. Not one of them really makes it home. I'm trying to think of it. I think there's one tiny one which manages to make it home, but even with all the things which happens to 4C and Sunda Strait, even with all that going on, the Japanese merchant ships which were in Africa and South America don't make it home. They either get interred or they get taken at sea. And that's a very successful warfare policy. It might not look like it's short term, because short term you might well be losing battles, but it's how you win a war. And that is the thing. The Royal Navy has been concentrating since the end of World War One, and since before World War One, but all that time it's been thinking about how to win wars. That's always been the Royal Navy's focus in many ways, but that's also very much why they have the cruiser policy they have. The Americans' policy of cruisers changes as time goes on. But the British policy on cruisers is always about having as many as they can, having as many destroyers as they can, because of this focus on fighting a war. Battles are going to happen. They don't think battles like Jutland are going to happen again, but they do think battles are going to happen. And you need battleships and you need aircraft carriers for that. But you need to have control of the water, control of the oceans, in order to make sure that the commerce that you want happens. And not the commerce you don't want. Conversation is still going on, Constantinos. Don't worry. Shomak, God, I really wish the Missouri was painted in Coast Guard colours for the surrender to Japan, but the USN can't have nice paint schemes, so we will forever wonder. Loki 392. Thanks all. Sorry I'm late. No worries. Thomas Vanderbilt. Ah, yes. Commerce being locked off was very disastrous in case of Germany. Triggered potentially the invasion of USSR for oil and the dependence on just one source, Romania. It's a shame that Britain didn't manage to keep control of Crete, because that would have been quite useful, because then you'd have had bombers in range. Hello, let's see. Am I back? Sorry about that. Not sure what happened. It just decided to cancel out on me. I have no idea why. I don't know. So now I'm going to run it slightly differently than I was running it before, and hopefully that allows me to watch things. Hopefully. Ay, caramba. Sorry about that. I have no idea why it decided that. It just suddenly decided that it was going to turn off the internet. Engage. Glad we didn't have to go to revisionally Al-Islam comps. It was tempting. It was tempting. But we are now on to my favourite one of them. The Amphion class do deserve their own stuff and do deserve their own coverage, hence tonight. And as I said, there is going to be a long patrol. Now, Romania also had lots of arable land and access to the Black Sea, but mainly oil, yes. Thomas Arnold, Nigerian Productions. The Romanian oil fields. Germany's only source of crude oil was in range of RAF bombers, hence when Mussolini screwed up. Magatruid attacked on the Wi-Fi. Yes, attacked on the Wi-Fi. I have no idea why the Wi-Fi went down. We have got new Wi-Fi set up and all these things, and as said, I have turned down the frame rate and the screen resolution in order to reduce its demands, in order to try and make it sort of slightly better, but it seems to cause it more fun. Constantinos, what would have happened if the Italians had discovered Libyan petroleum in the 30s? There would have been a lot more fighting over Libya, and there would have been a far bigger bomber presence. Or might Dr. Clark have caught gremlins from the guest of this week's Bill Trumps? Hey, if you haven't heard Steve George's stuff yet, you need to go listen to that. Steve George is cool. Steve George is really, really cool. Now, we're now going to start off with HMAS Sydney. Now, she is always called pretty much Sydney because while she is christened HMS Phaeton and commissioned on the 24th September 1935, she is pretty much commissioned as Sydney. She's renamed prior to her launch. The Royal Australian Navy pretty much again buy her in 1934 before she's launched. They decide to buy her because they really, really want a decent cruiser. and they really want a decent light cruiser. And New Zealanders are looking like they're going to be buying Leander class, and the Amphion class is supposed to be slightly better, and there is absolutely no competition between Antipodean brethren at all. At all, no competition going on. But she is a lovely looking ship. She's a really good looking ship. And she fights a very hard war. She is involved in a lot of actions. You know, she's sunk in 1941, but by that she's already managed to get Calabria, Spada, Mediterranean, Cormoran. Well, let's be honest, the Cormoran is what sinks her. And she sinks the Cormoran. But that's a story we'll be getting into. That's some history we will get into. The Battle of Cape Spada. Now, Cape Spada is an interesting battle. Why is it interesting? Because what happens, and I'm going to let you look at this in a second, is pretty much the Italians' worst nightmare. So I'll just answer some questions and then I'll decide go through the battle. Let's see. William Cox, bigger graphics card might be the answer. More video RAM is the new superpower. This one has this laptop has quite decent graphics for it, but it's going to, as I said, I have got a great big gaming PC, and when I've got space for it, I've got an office set up, it will be out. Thomas Vanderbilt, Dan Friedman, and yes, he and Mussolini had a huge argument. Hitler told Mussolini to keep the Balkans silent regardless. Assailant, because I'm planning something big, but then he invades Greece, disallows the RAF in the Greece. It was a lot of love. Jennifer, Dr. Clark, your sarcasm is showing. When isn't it? Sydney was much appreciated by Admiral Cunningham. I'll be getting into that, yes. So, here's what happens. Okay. I'm going to use my various personnel. This is HMAS Sydney. This is the Italian cruisers. And this is the Royal Navy destroyers. Now, here's the thing. The Royal Navy destroyers are up in the Adriatic looking for merchant ships. Little sheep going along here and going, hello, you're gone. The Italian cruisers, the Conderetti class, doing what they're supposed to be doing, hunting down destroyers, go, yes, unescorted British destroyers. No tribals, no cruisers. Well, hey, we're going to kill. And, well, Sydney was supposed to be all the way over here. Actually, it turns out Sydney's here. So this one tries to dive off this way to get to where Sydney is. The cruisers are chasing, and Sydney goes, hello, and whack, whack, whack. And they disappear, and then the Italians decide to run off. And they lose a cruiser. Actually, the Bartolomeo Coleni. To be honest, the other cruiser gets heavily damaged. Now, why is this interesting? Well, because the Italians have built these ultra-light cruisers to take out French destroyers, mainly. And we were discussing this in the treaty discussion of the 1930s. 1930 London Treaty. And they build them very well. And they are sort of the ultra-light cruisers. But then Sydney shows up, and I always imagine this is the city going up, hello, gentlemen! I hear you are imitation light cruisers. Meet a real one! I am here to give you a warm Australian welcome. I am going to make you living barbecues! And I know I shouldn't be sort of like that in terms of it. People actually die, and that's not nice. But it's just, It's what goes through my mind when I'm considering how Sydney turns up, because Sydney is not supposed to be where she is. Her captain pretty much disobeys orders, cranks on speed, and changes his entire line because he knows that the Italians like to turn up at dawn. So he decides he's going to make sure he is there as close as he can to dawn. And he is there. And the Italian cruisers, it's basically a case of, yes, we can beat your regular destroyers. But if there's a tribal destroyer there, they are going to smack us. If there is a proper light cruiser there, they will smack down. And these are two light cruisers, which are powerful ships. And they get hammered by Sydney. I think the actual figure is that Sydney fires 956 rounds of 6-inch shell. So let's have a look. This is the picture of Sydney afterwards. She reminds me of the pictures of Ajax and Achilles and their turrets after the Battle of the River Plate. She has fired 956 rounds of 6-inch shell. Think about that. 956. That is a lot of shells. She's got 8 guns. So that is the equivalent of 119.5 salvos. That's a lot of firing. And this is how they get summed up. The Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Cunningham, visits Sydney personally when she gets back to congratulate Captain Collins and his crew. He recalls in his memoirs, for this fine, brisk action, which showed the high efficiency and magnificent fighting qualities of the Royal Australian Navy, Captain Collins was immediately awarded the Companion of the Bath by His Majesty, a well-deserved honour. His Admiralty dispatch is, the credit for the successful and gallant action belongs to mainly to Captain J.A. Collins, CB ran, who, by his quick appreciation of the situation, offensive spirit, and resolution handling of HMAS Sydney, achieved a victory over a superior force, which has had important strategical effects. It is significant that, so far as is known, no Italian surface forces have returned into or near the Aegean since this action was fought. And that's the important thing. Cunningham also decides to start on is rumoured to be the origin of the nickname the Stormy Petal for HMAS Sydney. And throughout Australia, news of Sydney's victory dominating newspapers. The Melbourne Herald of the 20th of July 1940 reports, in addition, that once again the Australian Navy has shown the splendid fighting quality and efficiency of the last war. Sydney outfought and destroyed the famous Anthem, and now her younger sister writes another page of naval history that will thrill the civilized world. William Cox, that's what I did. I built a game, you see. Useful for filming music videos and blogs too. Keeps an old man busy. Cool. I like to build gaming PCs. I've got a decent one built up, but it's all sort of upstairs. There's no space for it in here. I did try and set it up in here, but, you know. Engage Sherry, what was the reason for the Anzac navies being so small at the outbreak of war in 1939? 8 cruisers, 5 destroyers, 4 sloops. Seems a bit light. Was it in the London Naval Treaty? No, it wasn't the London Naval Treaty at all. The Royal Britain was very happy for them to have more ships. We were very encouraging to have more ships. They were allowed more ships on the London Naval Treaty. They were allowed as many sloops as they liked, remember, on the London Naval Treaty. And they could have had as many corvettes as they liked on the London Naval Treaty. They could have even had a few more cruisers. We were happy for them to have more cruisers. They didn't want to spend the money. They were trying to do it on the cheap. Basically, we all know America complains these days about NATO allies doing everything, complaining all the time, but not actually spending enough on defense and not actually doing what they want them to do, and not actually being able to look after themselves. Well, basically, that's the British Empire and the Dominions. The Dominions get stroppy and complain about things and don't want to always take part, but they're also, in the nicest way, saving money on defense by using the British umbrella. Because the British have to spend the money. Derp Squad, HMAS Perth. Let me introduce you to our Lord and Saviour, the Mark 16 BL 6-inch gun. Yes, and HMAS Sydney is exactly the same. Hello, Federico Vego. Federico Vego, those guns saw a lot of battle. That's just one battle. That's after the Cape Spada. Marcus Solomon, I think it's a stormy petrol, not petal. There is a debate as to whether it's petal or petrol. It could well be petrol, in which case, but when I read two books which had different things in them, I just went with the petal one because that sounded more like an Englishman's approach to it, but it could be petrol. Frederico, they gave the Italians a proper smacking. Thomas Vanderbilt, those guns look like they've gone through a lot of heating. They have. Ian Carr, population of Australia and New Zealand was small model. That is true. Carl Gaspard, at least the HMAS Sydney fired caseless ammo. World War I Rapunzel in the Battle of 300 Strait, knee deep in brass. Ouch. She's a good ship. I have a lot of affection for this class, and I think they do a very good job. But the Cormorant. Sydney sailed from Fremantle on Armistice Day, the 11th of November 1941, to escort the troop ship Zealandia to Sunda Strait, where she was to be relieved by the British cruiser HMS Durban for the last leg of the voyage to Singapore. The voyage was without incidents, and at noon on 17th of November, Zealandia was turned over to Durban, D-class cruiser, and then proceeded back to Fremantle, where she was expected to arrive on the afternoon of the 20th of November 1941. She didn't arrive. This is the story of the Cormorant. What was the difference between the Leanders and the Amphions? It's the unit power plants, and it's their length, their hull, and the fact they have two funnels. But also, it's the slightly different emphasis on their arrangement, their armor. There are lots of little changes. The difference between a slight difference between an Aston Martin DB9 and a Aston Martin DBS. Okay, they look very similar from the outside, but once you get inside, there's so many changes. They are incredibly different. They are different, completely different cars, and it's the same with these. Nighthand Productions. What is a petal or petrol? Petrol I can understand. They're very tenacious seabirds, but I have no idea what a petal is. Petal. Not pepple, petal. Owen Cox. We were still using brass cartridge obturation for the 538 in the 70s. As DC investigator, I got to clean them off the deck after gunfire practice on Gitmo. A great time. Ooh. Very good. So they couldn't be disabled a single hit. That was pretty much the plan. The idea was that a single torpedo wouldn't take them out. You really don't get over the Cormorant, eh? Thomas Hannibal. No, you don't. I have been now talking non-stop since about 9 a.m. this morning, so if my voice is starting to get a bit weird, I do apologize. I probably haven't drunk enough iron brew. Hello, Kilo 19. Ian Carr, strange that South Africa had and have no significant navy in view of their strategic position. Basically, they get around it by the fact that none of their neighbours have a navy. And that's how they avoid it. But, you know, they might well have to get one at some point. So the trouble is with me, for me, is that the reconstruction events relies entirely on people from one side. And my whole problem with the Cormoran and the event is, why do they get so close? Yes, there are lots of innocent reasons, but why does Sydney get so close? Now, my thinking is the reason Sydney gets so close is she's wanting to take the ship. She's wanting to capture it. And she's trying to get close enough for the boats to get off. And she thinks with her firepower just pointing at them, they're not going to fire. But there is part of me which thinks that's a bit of a... There's also the fact of the story that it goes. Basically, as she gets close, there's a signals exchange. Eventually, they figure out that the Cormoran is definitely not who she's claiming to be. The Cormoran flashes up, apparently, the German flag, and then fires and manages to take out the bridge. And that stops Sydney responding. My problem with that is that not all the senior officers would have been on the Sydney's bridge. And if you consider what seems to happen, there are no signals get off, so they have to have lost radio straight away as well. Well, that's quite a lot of damage for a ship to lose its radio and its command and control. So, especially when you have secondary wireless transmitting stations, you have secondary radio positions, you have all these things. Why are they not getting off any signals? You also have the problem that she apparently goes off, limps off, and sinks, according to the story that we are given. And that when you look at her position on the seabed, that would seem to be sensible. But if she's limping off and is floating enough at that time, again, and there are fires ranging, but launching boats, getting off the ship... Basically, the fact that there are no survivors from the Australian side, and we haven't found any trace of survivors, we haven't found any boats having made it to shore anywhere, or anything like that, it just seems... I find it hard to follow as a simple story. Greg Sassy, Stormy Petrel is a family of birds, some of which live in Australia. It makes far more sense than petal. Books can have typos, which then get repeated by other books. That is possibly the case. Jennifer Dirt Squad, the British Mark 23 6-inch was a 50 caliber, while the Mark 16 US 6-inch was a 47 caliber. Both excellent guns, but the iron gun was of higher velocity, ergo slightly better penetration. Ian Carr, different captain for the Cormoran incident. I think so, yes. What did the Germans have on the Cormoran? Well, the Cormoran was officially armed with 6 15 centimeter or 5.9 inch guns, 2 3.7 inch centimeter or 1.46 inch anti-tank guns, 5 20 millimeter flak 30 anti-aircraft guns, 6 torpedo tubes, 2 in twin deck mounts and 2 single aft angled submerged tubes, carrying 24 torpedoes, plus some naval mines. She's quite a powerful ship. She's the largest of the auxiliary cruisers built, and the most recently constructed when she's modified. And she's quite successful. But see, here's the official account. Dr. Clark, are you suggesting something like the Germans may have opened fire under the wrong flag? I'm not sure. Dunrick, would have, should have, whatever it was, sounds like a perfect storm. Potentially. Thomas Manuel, wait, nobody aboard Sydney survived? Okay, that stinks. And the wireless could have been hit in the antennas. There's weird conditions there for shortwave propagation too. Yes, there's all sorts of things which can, but the fact is, it is a perfect. It's either a perfect storm takes out the Sydney, or for a ship the size of Sydney, I can't imagine a single shot taking out enough of a single point of weakness to take out all the command and wireless. Yeah, plus their preparation must have been well aimed volley to say the least, or torpedoes, but even that. Let's read through it. Okay. Returning from her convoy duties to Java, Sydney was proceeding south along the northwest coast, and this is the official summary, okay, of Western Australia, when she sighted what appeared to be a merchant vessel at about 1600 hours on 19th November 1941, some 130 miles west of Shark Bay. HMAS Sydney set a course to intercept, while challenging for identification via lights and flag signals. The ship was in fact the Cormorant. Sydney challenged the vessel continuously using her searchlight, while at the same time closing range between the two ships. Merchant vessels were known to be less efficient at visually signalling, and the Germans exploited this knowledge through their actions on their flag deck, and by their slow response to Sydney's visual challenges. At 1700 hours, to further the deception, Cormorant broadcast a suspicious ship message, feigning a cry for help in the name of Strait Malacca. The Sydney's efforts to establish the true identity vessel resulted in her closing the range to a point where she no longer had the advantage of a superior armament. This is the thing. Why is she closing range so much? Okay, yes, there are problems, but... The Inkar, some remains have been quite recently located to allow some further consideration of how she was lost. Yes, and this report is what's produced after that. Entire Savan, 2 lucky torpedoes. Engaging strategy. Any suggestions that one of Cormorant's shells could have penetrated a magazine or developed detonated secondary shells, resulting in something similar to what happened to Hood? Nope. The Cormorant is also sunk by the damage that goes on, but the Cormorant's crew managed to survive. Now, Productions, what are your thoughts of the Caliph float with one decomposed corpse found on Christmas Island in February 42? Yeah, it's rather a lot if that's just one afloat gets away. And that could have come from an aircraft as well, that float. At approximately 17:15 hours, the Sydney had drawn almost a beam of Cormorant to starboard, less than a mile distance. Both ships were steering west-southwest at about 15 knots. Still wary, the Australian cruiser kept her main armament trained on the mysterious ship, and her amphibious aircraft was on the catapult with its engine running. Again, that's strange. Why haven't they launched their aircraft? You know, why not? Yes, Burnett receives his first direct command when he's posted HMAS Sydney, but he's not a bad officer either. She then signals, both by flags and flashing light, "Where are you bound?" Cormorant replied, "Batavia." The crucial moment then came when Sydney hoisted a 2-flag signal consisting of the letters IK, which the radar could not interpret. They were in fact the 2 center letters of the Strait Malacca's 4-letter secret identification signal, IIKP. With no reply, forthcoming signal in plain language, "Show your secret sign." Finally, when concealment of the vessel's true identity was no longer possible, and with the advantage of surprise, Detner's orders the Dutch colours to be struck, hoists the German naval ensign, and opens fire at approximately 17:30 hours with all armament at a range somewhat more than a mile. It is likely that the raiders' first salvo destroyed Sydney's bridge, which resulted that her primary controls immediately put out of action. Sydney's own guns opened fire almost simultaneously with a full salvo that passed over the Cormorant without inflicting damage. Cormorant again scored hits on the Sydney, with 2 salvos again hitting her bridge and midship section. According to the Germans, all of Cormoran's armament was brought to bear on Sydney, concentrating on her bridge, torpedo tubes, and anti-aircraft batteries. For a few seconds after her initial salvo, Sydney did not reply. It appears that her forward A and B turrets were put out of action, leaving only her aft X and Y turrets to respond. It was reported by the Germans that Sydney's X turret opened fast and accurate fire, hitting Cormoran in the funnel and engine room. Y turret is said to have fired only 2 or 3 salvos, all of which went over. At about this time, one of the Rainer's 2 torpedoes struck Sydney under A and B turrets. The other passed close ahead of the struggling ship, which subjected to enfilading fire. With her bow low in the water, Sydney then turned sharply towards Cormoran as though attempting to ram. As she did so, the top of B turret was blown off and flew overboard. The cruiser then passed under Cormoran's stern, heading to the south and losing way. Cormoran, maintaining her course and speed, was now on fire in the engine room, where hits by Sydney's X turret had caused severe damage. Smoke from the fire hid Sydney from Cormoran's bridge, but the raider continued to engage her afterguns as the range opened to approximately 4,400 yards. At about 17:45 hours, Sydney was seen to fire a torpedo when Denters was turning his ship to port to bring his broadside to bear. As he did so, Cormoran's engines began to fail. The torpedo track was sighted and was subsequently avoided. Simultaneously, the raider's engines broke down completely. Sydney, crippled and on fire from the bridge to the after funnel, steamed slowly to south, returning only sporadic fire from a secondary armament. Although by now the range had opened to 6,600 yards, Sydney continues to receive steady hits from Cormoran's port broadside. 1800 hours at a range of 7,700 yards, Cormoran then fires one torpedo that misses Sydney's stern. Although the fierce action had lasted only half an hour, both ships had been dealt mortal blows. Cormoran fires her last shots at 1825 hours at a range of about 11,000 yards. The Germans claim to have fired approximately 450 rounds from their main armament and hundreds from their anti-aircraft batteries. With the gathering gloom, the former Sydney disappeared from view and was last seen with Germans about 10 miles off, heading approximately south-southeast. Thereafter, until about 2200 hours, all that's seen was a distant glare that occasionally flickerings until midnight, at which time all trace of Sydney disappeared. Of Sydney's total complement of 42 officers and 603 ratings, none survived. This number included 6 members of the Royal Australian Air Force and 4 civilian canteen staff. The only material evidence recovered from Sydney was an Australian-type naval-type Cardi lifeboat, recovered 8 days after the action by HMAS Hobart, and an Australian naval pattern lifebelt recovered by HMAS Warala. The Cardi float is now preserved in the Australian War Memorial at Canberra. This is my point. If the action goes down, as the Cormoran crew apparently claim and have stated in their interviews and their interrogations, there is a lot of time for the crew to abandon ship. Okay, maybe they don't go getting off lifeboats, but there is a lot of time for them to get on off that ship. It's, it's strange to me. Tom Fanner, the combination of hubris on Sydney and good aiming on the German part, and it's weird. One crew, one survives and one other none at all. Maybe they tried to wipe out all evidence in a panic? I honestly don't think anyone tried to wipe out evidence, but there are lots of survivors from the Cormoran. There are no survivors from the Sydney. Sure, Mac, they're expecting contact. Why keep the plane on deck? That's the thing. That's again. If you're expecting, if I have a ship doing that, why not send off my my seaplane to do a scout of it? And that actually would be standard procedure. Also, there's the fact that I start to look at this and I wonder if you're in a scenario where there's a lot more crew exposed than normally. If you're at action stations, that crew is all usually under protection. It's in their positions. So in order to really start to take out the command structure, as you would seem to have done from the Cormoran's account, then a lot of that crew needs to be on deck watching. You don't have all those officers, all those chief petty officers in one place. You don't have all that senior staff there. It just seems... Don't think. What did the examiner find when examining the wreck? Any sign of lifeboats or abandoning ship? Well, let me just grab up the picture of it. Now, the wreck of HMAS Sydney, has been found on the 16th of March 2008, approximately 207 kilometres or 128 miles from the west coast of Steepley Point of Western Australia. It's about 2,500 metres down. Again, it's only, this is going to sound terrible to say, but it's not even 150 miles from the Australian coast. And no survivors. I haven't seen any pictures of the actual wreck yet, and I haven't seen any of that. So once we do that, perhaps we'll learn more. But it still seems... Jebila, from the sound of things, all the Sydney's boats were set on fire. Cormorants were not damaged. That as may be, but they have a lot of Carly floats still stored aboard in various places. These are warships, and they have a lot more ships than just the ones in the centre. A lot more boats than just the ones in the centre. So, again, and it's only 128 miles off the coast of Australia. There are a few lifeboats on the seabed, yes. Pretty rotten, though. Vision, if there is a different story with all the survivors from Cormorant, you would think such a story would come out eventually. No, because who actually knows what goes on a ship? Drac and me have this conversation quite often. If you're a gun crew, if you're anything like that, if you're anywhere hidden behind thing, you don't know what's going on. I don't know if there is a... I'm not one of the conspiracy theorists, but I think they must have either had the luckiest shots known to mankind, or they actually managed to get closer somehow, and closer than the mile range. Engage a strategy. Surely the lifeboat point is a little off. Even if Sydney's boats were all destroyed in engagement, they'd still have Carly floats and personal lifesaving gear. Yes. Devscod. So before, say, Savo Island, where a couple of ships were set ablaze by their planes being hit. Again, if the plane's hit and spooling up, why haven't you launched it? If you got the plane fuel not there, why haven't you launched it? The cruiser may or may not have been at action stations. The main guns and port torpedo launcher trained on the Cormorant, and her Walrus scout plane had been ready for launch. Yes. Which is all... The aircraft was shut down by 1725 and catapults swung into the storage position. The two ships were too close for a safe launch. Yes, but it's a... nicest way, it is a... They have other options. And they should have launched it probably before then. Ah. Lionheart Extra. If you watch most disaster monitoring, normally they don't follow standard operating procedure. So maybe they didn't follow standard operating, so that's why it's hard to figure out what happened. To an extent, but again, the standard operating procedure, this is a rather large crew. It's rather a lot of people. Could you envisage a scenario where Cormorant's account is accurate? Sydney, knowing how close she is to Australia, attempts to limp home, suffers a catastrophic damage control problem and capsizes? The thing is, if it is accurate, then there's the damage. The other option, and this is the one option I sometimes consider, is was there a freak wave? Was she managing to make it home? Was she less damaged than Cormorant thinks? Damaged enough to limp home, but not so damaged that they don't think they have to get off her. And then she gets overwhelmed by a freak wave coming out from somewhere. That's the possibility. Maybe they were executed. By who? The Cormorant crew? Well, if they did that, surely that story would have come out. They would have known that one. And that one wouldn't have been able to be hidden for forever. They're getting their closest land is Australia, So it's not as if they're going to be picked up by the Japanese. Vision. In the images of the wreck I've seen, her bow has gone right into an A turret. Looks like a lot of damage, including to turrets. Yes, but we all know the stories of HMS Eskimo and other ships. You can limp home with your bow missing. That seems more reasonable. Maybe a damage control mistake like the Japanese made one of carriers. Could be, but it just... These ships are more survivable even than Leanders. We know how much damage the Leanders take. We know how much damage other ships take. It's a, you know... Dan Freeman. So maybe something like electrical failure, then limping home trying to fix wireless, and then the late fire reaches a magazine or something. Bow gets taken off by a rogue wave. It's a whole combination. And there's the fact that they don't radio in at all what's going on. They don't send off a communication tool to their command telling them they're investigating a suspicious ship. Dirt Squad, if they're at battle stations, might have been difficult to get out with sudden catastrophic damage. Well, yes and no, but again, the account isn't about sudden and catastrophic damage. This is the thing. The account says they limp off. So that's not sudden and catastrophic damage. That takes place over time. Difference in the action seems to be Cormoran's fire control was intact and Sydney's was knocked out early. Also, the German torpedoes. Again, that doesn't make sense because they don't have a single fire control system. They have backup fire control. Okay? The Amphion class, the Leander class, all the running cruisers, yes, they have a primary fire control system up on the top, up on the bridge, above the bridge, but they have a secondary fire control system as well. Secondary fire director. Again, apparently X turret is firing accurately and fast, which causes all the damage, but Y turret is firing wide. A and B turret cease firing. This is the account given. Frederick, it's unlikely, but it could happen, but it's unlikely. Dirt Squad, something like a boiler breach or steam explosion? Who knows? Engaging strategy. How were they for compartmentalization? I'm thinking maybe a lethal error, counting flooding attempt. Well, that's the thing. The Amphion class actually has better subdivision than the Leander class because of the unit design. And Shilmak, doesn't each turret have its own rangefinder? Yes, it does have. So they have local control as well. And that's the other thing. Again, whilst they are 150 miles, let's say, 128 miles is found where they're sunk, but let's say they started signaling when they were 150 miles out. There are ships, okay, small ships, in the area which could have reached them if they'd been signaling. Magnum reduction. In the documentary it mentioned, it does allege, and I stress allege, that some radio operators of Western Australia did indeed receive radio signals from Sydney. How much of this is fact, people getting in on the mystery and being involved in some way is difficult to determine. Yeah, that is the trouble. Vanderbilt. Also, there are some radio propagation issues in that part of World in World War II, which would have look up exactly when. Sometimes there's just zero reception on nearly every frequency except VLF frequency in the Pacific. Well-known fact that hampered wireless telegraphy a lot. It's not like European waters. Jeff Beeler, secondary fire control, pretty rudimentary on the Amphion. Vulnerable to German light AA fire. The latter made a difference. I wouldn't say so. It's the same as the Leander class, and that stands up quite well. And Engage strategy. If the Rex bow was gone and the Cormoran reported A and B turrets out of action, that may indicate the potential of something unexploded causing a catastrophic explosion. Potentially. Wasn't there a story conspiracy attached to this action involving a Japanese submarine? Yes, but that's unlikely again in that area in the range. But no, it's a thing. It's something to think about. And it's something I find interesting in the Cormoran story. As I said, I don't think the Cormoran crew are lying. I just don't know. It doesn't make sense to me quite all that happened. Downstream, delay bang. If a torpedo or 6-inch shell fuse didn't go off immediately, it could go off later, possibly while being disarmed. Possibly just at random. Potentially. Shumack, wasn't there an air search from the mainlands area after a day or so? Yes. JP, the Leanders had rudimentary secondary fire control too. It's not rudimentary. It's basic for the time. It's basic, yes. And rudimentary by comparison to 1945, but in 1939, 1940, it's quite good for a backup system. It is your backup system. And for 500 kilohertz emergency band, you need your big antennas. That's the only frequency that works locally in a 50 to 200 mile range. Yes. And the thing is, you also have to consider in this story is that Sydney was the pride of the nation. Far more than Perth and Hobart were, which were later purchases after. Sydney really is the big ship for the Australians. She's the new ship, the modern looking ship. She's really appreciated. She's really loved. As said, she's the pride of the nation. Sure, on Mac, they're at 1 mile or closer. You don't need super advanced fire control to hit that. No, you don't. The German Navy generally seem to be fairly honest about things. Look at their reports on Glowworm and Sunderland. That sank a U-boat. VCs on enemy accounts. Yeah, that was true. And as I said, I'm not questioning the Cormoran account. All I'm questioning is how the Cormoran account marries up with the Sydney happening what the Sydney happens with. And she does a whole national cruise. Also, when you look at that, you look what she's probably heading for, and I have a theory about that, but I reckon, looking at that map, that she is trying to head for Geraldton. Because if we consider where the engagement is, Geraldton is here, and if I pop this up again and move that to there, that accords with that bit, and there is Geraldton, and I think that's where she was heading. I think she was heading for Geraldton Town, because I think she was damaged, but I think she thought she could make it. And that also tells me something as well. If she's doing that, that tells me she's under navigation. That tells me they are starting to try to get control of the ship, which suggests they have got some control over direction, which suggests they are doing what they need to do, which suggests they've got officers aboard, which suggests they have got a command structure going. Maybe the captain's been killed, but obviously someone has taken charge, and that's they have navigation. Because if they are heading from the engagement towards the nearest port, which has the facilities to support them, they're not heading straight inland. They're heading for that suggests the ship isn't as badly damaged as it to me. It could all be random. It could all be things that are going on, but it makes it more and more interesting because I'm sure it wasn't a Japanese submarine involved. So I am wondering what happened. And you know me, this is the engineering history side of me looking at it going, trying to figure out what went wrong. Jeff Beeler, Cormorant's crew gives up trying to save the ship earlier than Sydney's crew, as their ship is less valuable. Sydney's crew stays with her too long to save them. Magazine explosion? Well, they've looked at there's only the bow missing, and it's a bit in front of A turret, so it's not even a B turret forward, it's A turret forward, bow missing. That is a loss, but again, I point to HMS Eskimo, I point to other examples of ships which have survived losing their bows. They have very strong bulkheads for a reason, especially at the turret lines, at the turret mounts. So, Shamak, the ship not sending of radio messages at any point is extremely bizarre, before the engagement and after. Wincox, I'm not arguing, Dan, merely pointing out the obvious discrepancy. I cite fighter plane kill claims, spotter planes misidentifying, and not on bridge crews pontificating on matters not fully understood. Dan Freeman, generally, the sea is a big enough enemy that once a ship is neutralized, you don't need to make things worse for the survivors. Agreed. William Cox. Dan Freeman, William Cox, I'm a doctor. I'm a firm believer in the Dr. House mantra of everybody lies. I said, I don't think the Cormorant crew are lying. I just don't know what happens to Sydney. And I'm really, really interested in it because she's a good ship. She's got a good crew. From the looks of things, from what's happening, she's under a command. I'm not sure who's in charge, but someone is in charge. And she has spare cable aboard for wireless on her. She has all those things. She has multiple sorts of firefighting equipment aboard. As Thomas found out, there's a little difference between Cormorant Sydney and that displacement. I think that counts a lot too in terms of flooding them on today. Actually, more what matters is subdivision and the division you are internally. Lionheart X-Ray, US had a couple of cruisers return home with no bow. Yes, the British do. The British have destroyers return home with no bow. No bow isn't necessarily a knockout. Dan Freeman, it could have been lecture sort of an issue with the main wireless down and secondary goes wonky to in action. That's potential, but it's unlikely. They carry spares and a lot of ability to make components. A torpedo breaking a keel. Well, that would be an option, but that's not what they found. They found the only significant damage they found to the hull is the missing bow. Phillips, 1 point re-radio. Would Cormorant have attempted to jam Sydney once firing started? Potentially, if they had jamming equipment, but actually Sydney has the more powerful jamming equipment, so I'm not sure why Sydney wasn't jamming away. That could also explain why Sydney wasn't firing, wasn't radioing herself, because she had her jamming running and was jamming them. Eamon, hi, Dr. Clark. Hi, Eamon. Engaged. I think the issue is how far we believe the Cormorant account. Either they lied about a lot, or they're pretty much as honest as they could be. I think it's the latter. And that's my thoughts, honestly, because, as I said, I would be tempted to see if they flagged maybe a distress signal at some point, or something which could be interpreted as a distress signal to get the Sydney closer, but, you know. Remember reading a report on the material state of the wreck. The bow is at the head of the ship and upside down. The report made a note that the steel appeared buckled but not blown out, so I'd rule out a magazine detonation. That would seem, I would agree with that one as well. And if the bow's not that far away, that probably suggests that the bow broke on the way down rather than breaking off earlier. Eamon, Dr. Freeman, why do you say that? Patients lie. Oh, yeah, they do. Austin Eamon, afternoon everyone, afternoon Austin. JVL, no boom, heading southeast at 1.5 knots. Sydney's bow tore off. The rest sank shortly afterward and glided upward upright for 500 meters underwater until it hit the seabed stern first. Again, if they're doing damage control at the time, there'll be crew on the deck. Carly floats, and it's not that far. Engaged, and Sydney's loss was down to something insignificant which occurred internally in Sydney, potentially. William Cox, read psychiatrist Dr. Philip Zimbardo on anecdotal accounts. Thomas Vanderbilt, that's close to impossible to jam. Morse code in CW mode is the most jam-proof moment that exists. It's not that easy. Dan Freeman, people misremember things or add details that they think should be present when they think through a scenario. It's not deliberate lying, but still passing off incorrect information. So also, I also went to the council, police, and court. Gahaman, are you planning on trying War Thunder, the next update, and HMS Dreadnought, and your much other small ships are all present? I might do. Jeremy, how constructed subdivider were sections of the bottom? Overkeel and pipes running along that may flood and open way for water into multiple compartments from hull and bow? No, again, they all have things which are designed to stop that, basically. Thomas Vanderbilt, even if drowned in static here, I can still pick up CW signals from 100,000 miles away with a one-tube receiver, but audio is impossible. But everyone uses CW Morse code. Thanks for answering my off-topic question, Doug Freeman. Yeah, he's good. Right. It's confusing. As I said, I'm not the sort to really get involved in terms of conspiracy theories. And I don't think it is a conspiracy theory. I don't think there's some magical submarine which appears. I just think something goes wrong. And I want to know what goes wrong for the crew. And I'm not sure if it's a freak wave, what it is. But something happens because that ship doesn't, to me, from the cormorant's account, sound like a mortally wounded ship. It sounds like a severely damaged ship. The cormorant's certainly mortally wounded. But, and also the thing is, if anyone does survive, it's probably of the senior officers, it's probably the chief engineer. And if any chief engineer would have the best idea of how survivable that ship is and whether it can stay afloat. And yes, there is a kind of optimism bias, but no chief engineer is not that cynical. I'll be back in a second. It's one of those interesting things, you know. Ben Laura, maybe it was a relation of the chief engineer from Canopus. No, I don't think that. Marcus Osman, forward bow breaks off around the Azdic dome. Other flooding already after different damage. One man lived. Yeah. But in Neptune, there was a reason for it. And Neptune is a Leander class, and as I said, the Amphion class are actually better subdivided and better production. Imagine, if a Summer Sank cruiser, they'd made back to base, they would certainly report it, yeah. Old Richard, as a former Cheng, I can confirm archetypal cynicism. Yes. Jeff Beeler, Comran's captain focuses on saving his crew. Sydney's command crew are dead, and remaining crew are focused on saving the ship and are suddenly overwhelmed by the bow falling off. Possibly, but unlikely. In Car, if Sydney was not thought to be mortally damaged, would she not have waited around to pick up survivors from the Cormoran? Just because she's not mortally damaged doesn't mean she's not very badly damaged. Vision, catastrophic failure leading to immediate loss of ship likely explains it. The one freighter Edmund Fitzgerald sank all freighter with its whole crew. Lots of other ships have disappeared. Yeah, the Fitzgerald is one of those interesting things which I wouldn't call an all freighter, and I would call a boat rather than a ship if it's the one I'm thinking on the Great Lakes. I can pretty much explain that. It has no subdivision inside it. It has no real bulkheads inside it, and a huge space. So it's a box which has no supporting structures and is getting twisted in the seas and the storms and all these things, and eventually cracks and bye bye. If it's the one I'm thinking about and looking at it, because I used to have a discussion with my dad about that one because it was an interesting thing. Neptune hit 4 mines. That does rather explain sudden catastrophic failure. Jeff Beeler, the fires might have meant the crew aft was not aware of that the bow had fallen off and the ship was in danger of immediate sinking. You see, you've got surface fires, but you've got a lot of firefighting going on, probably. The question is, would you not know what's going on at the front? You possibly might not know. But given the time to get the fire under control, you would probably have found it. And again, for them to have even glided and reached that point would have had to been a couple of hours or more on the surface. Dunragano, could a freak wave combined with compromised life rafts have doomed any potential surviving crew? Potentially. DC damage control crews would be active if they could have been. Yes, they would be. I would imagine bow falling off would have caused a lot of vibration to be rather loud inside the ships. It would probably have made a noise. Dan Thomas Vandervelde, the backup transmitter on many ships in World War II was a still spark transmitter. Leftovers from World War I, but an electric surge vacuum tubes can handle. I need an equipment list from Sydney. See that you're not about here. There is an after control position. There's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of secondary things built into these ships. Okay? And again, I would point out the Amphions, because of the secondary funnel, because of the unit arrangement of the power, and the fire only apparently spreads back to the after funnel, which means your after engines are intact, your propellers are intact. And if necessary, you could string a communications cable, wireless antennae, from the funnel to the aft flagstaff. In fact, they did have those. So the odds are you could re-establish communications if you want to, and you probably can do. Bichon, the Emma Fitzgerald was taking a storm. They're pretty sure now a rogue wave. It hit a few miles ahead, nosed it down, then vertically it broke in two. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I'm just going to find this one. Now, let's see. I'm going to change that. For that, I just found this. This is apparently a picture, one of the images produced from the survey of the wreck, which, you know, it shows the damage done to the bow, but again, Vision, all those backups, redundancies, and corrections is what makes a cruiser a cruiser. Yes. Sheffield, Sydney's flame glow was visible on the horizon to Cormoran's crew. Big fires, light AA shot up the deck cabins where the radio gun was. Yes. Didn't think that was possible. Wait, it did jump a little. Yeah. I've seen ships take 15 to 20 minutes to recover from a complete loss of power, even with emergency generators. Yes, you can do, but the limits of what these jury rigged things can do. The good question is too, was anybody listening on the other side of the frequency? Hence the logs. Lots of sea bottom photos. Yeah. Does Sydney have redundancy in things like firefighting mains? Yes, they did. Is that not A and B turrets still in place? It does look like it to me. Analysis predicted that up to 70% of those aboard were killed during the battle. Mearns estimated the cruiser's hull would have remained afloat for at most 2 minutes after the bow sunk. Yeah, but me and Mearns are a different kettle of fish. But, you know, it's true. It could have done. But again, if it's 2 minutes and that's 70% of the crew, let's be honest, if we go through the crew numbers. So, there are roughly 645 people aboard. So 70% of the crew are dead. Let's say if we go by Mearns, well, by my count, and this could be wrong, that still leaves 255 alive. Okay, that's possibly not enough to save a ship, but if you're telling me out of 255, no one survives to make it ashore, it just seems, yeah. There is something going on there. And there were radio signals from the Cormoran picked up. It's an interesting mystery. The boats were all found with the hull, except for two that shot away. There were also shoes found in the on the seabed. William Cox, engineering crews and boiler room crews don't get out. That's why we have escape trunks today. Defense of Science Technology also used Mearns shipwreck footage for a technical analysis of damage to Sydney, which showed it could be consistent with German accounts. 70% of crew dead. I at no point have I critiqued German accounts. I'm not sure about the 70% dead figure. I do sometimes wonder about these analyses, but even as I said, with 70% dead, 70% of the crew dead, that still leaves 250 odd, 255, let's say. Lots of big sharks or sharks. Well, it could be, that could account for a fair number, yes, but that's still a lot of people. And again, if I go back and get the sort of fiction, there are all sorts of ships which come out and pick up the Cormoran's crew, yet don't pick up don't manage to find any of the crew of the Sydney. There's also the fact that Cormoran is basically sinks almost on top of the battle site, whereas the Sydney has made it quite a lot further away. Hmm. You see, the difference here is I'm not sitting here, and I do think it's quite possible that the Cormoran did the damage to Sydney that she claimed. But I think it's going to sound strange. I'm looking at the damage, and I'm not sure. I don't see enough damage in my mind. And reading reports, and I've read a lot of them, that she should have sunk like she did. I do think there had to be a big wave or something else involved. And I've been looking at the sea state, and I haven't found out much about that. So, you know. Dirt Squad, if the bow breaks off before the impact of seabed, it would be quite far from the wreck. Yes. JP, the higher survival rate from the Cormoran was because, unlike Sydney, the raiders' boats and thrusts were well equipped and mostly undamaged. Sydney's raiders and boats were Sydney's boats and ships were well equipped and damaged, and they're mostly on the seabed. It looks like. Aviator Enterprise. What are the currents like in the area? Possible survivors swept out west, further into ocean, never to return? That is an option. But again, the Cormoran ones are all swept north, and they're not that far away. Take care, Jennifer. Oh, Richard, HMS Good Hope, Monmouth lost with all hands at Coronel, but they blow up. This ship, as you can see from the pictures, has not blown up. I'm not sure. I could be placing too much faith in the engineering. But it just doesn't look to me. And the distance she's going, and if she's going at speed, the speed they say she's going. The plane not being in the air does baffle me as well, Shawmac. I would have launched it earlier, but that's Buffett's decision. Yes, Peter. Although Sydney is thought of as the only warship lost of all hands, the JCF at that report lists 8 other surface warships of similar size lost during World Wars where none survived. Yep. Discounting catastrophic explosion, how many other warships, Sydney size, lost with all hands during World War II, and in what concurrence? According to Jeff Beeler, there's 8 other ships, but, you know. Vision, if the ship capsized, would it have lost its turrets? Yes. It looks like she sank the Britannic in World War One. Yeah, she does look like she landed vertically on a sort of proper right way up. Danny Freeman, had Sydney been damaged before to have incomplete or inadequate repairs that might have opened up? Nope. She had a charmed life, it seems. Odd Richard, Monmouth did not blow up. She capsized, according to the SS Nuremberg witnesses. Okay, she has some. She has quite a big explosion and then capsizes. So you know. Nope. That is the mystery of the Amphion class, and I will re-emphasize that I am not suggesting. I think the Cormoran crew are telling the truth. I just am not sure. Knowing what I do about ships and knowing what I do about what happened the warships do in World War II and the procedures they follow. It's a question. It's definitely something which I'm looking into. And as I said, I am going to record a long patrol on this class, which will come out during November Research Week. Vision, was it hot? Hatches and the scuttles all open like Britannic, ship not at action stations? No, the ship apparently was at action stations because if you're turning your turrets on something, you are ships at action stations. This is the other thing I don't sort of understand, because if they are being taken in by the deception of the Cormoran, then why have they got all their turrets, torpedoes turned out? They might be being taken in to an extent in that they're getting closer, but they've obviously got very strong suspicions. If they weren't suspicious, they wouldn't have the guns round. Derp Squad, turrets aren't held in. If capsized, turrets like to drop out of mounts if the ship blows up. Might not have turned enough for them to drop out. Possibly, but it's landed. Thing. Take care, William Cox. Take care, old Richard. Go enjoy your supper. Albert Walding, hello. Don't think I've seen you in a while. There was a body in a Cardi float that washed up on a Christmas Island in February 1942. It's widely believed to be from Sydney, but they were unable to confirm that by DNA checking. Hull up, not bow up. Yes, but the bow's not that far away from the ship. And it's in front of the ship, which suggests that the bow continued on. It's weird, that one. It is weird. Vision. Yes, so she must not have capsized, making point as aggression. Looks like she sank on an even keel. Water kept pouring in and she steadily went down, yet with no survivors. That's some of the interesting questions going on. There is a lot to be considered about this one. Definitely. Thomas Vanderbilt, if there's 70% killed, that's a lot of blood to draw the sharks in. Yes, but that's also a lot of very easy prey in the water to go for, rather than the stuff which is trying to get into Carly floats and lifeboats. And the Indianapolis did have survivors. Good reading. Yeah, I do recommend the Jeff Miller, the Terence Cole book, The Loss of HMAS Sydney. You know, I've read these books, and let's put it this way: that I do not dispute that they've done very good research, and I do understand their basis of their things, their arguments, and their points. I'm not sure why, but there are some things in history which just niggle at me. And it could be me having spent too much time in the history, it could be lots of things, but there are some stories which just sort of niggle away. And I want to learn more, I want to look in more, because I'm looking at them and thinking, that doesn't quite fit with how I think it would go. With how even under those circumstances, it's like the standard operating procedures. Okay, let's say the ship's got really lax under Buffett, which is doubtful, but let's say it has. It's not just him. He's not just the officer. He's not the only senior officer aboard. There's also the executive officer. There's all the other ones. There are lots of officers. You're basically saying the entire command has to have gone, in the middle of a war, gone, you know what, we're taking a month off from doing our operations. They're not like that. Naval officers aren't like that, especially not ones who get the senior roles. Dirt Squad, is the area known for freak waves? If already damaged and sitting lower than normal, could explain no survivors and no SS call. Yeah, this is my thinking. I'm wondering if there was a freak wave, but no part of the ocean is not known for freak waves. They can occur anywhere, pretty much. Vision, if Australia invents time travel, this is likely to be the first thing they'll want to check out for historical research. That and Gallipoli. Albazaski, it looks similar to USS Juno. She sunk in 20 seconds. Rescue came after 8 days, and there were only 10 survivors out of 100 in water. Was there a search for the Sydney crew? There was a search. Daniel Freeman, Dr. Clark, it feels too easy an option to blame human error and all these things happened for the loss of a signet warship and lots of lives. Yes. In naval terms, they're not that far. They are far enough apart that it suggests Sydney was under power and moving and out of sight. Close enough that, frankly, the survivors should have been found in the same search. In car, some crew still on another Pitcairn island. I'd hope not, for their sakes. And really, the closest, largest lump of land, that area, and there aren't really islands, is Australia itself. So if they were on some other Pitcairn island, that would actually be somewhere on the coast of Australia. Jeff Beeler, why would she hit the bottom stern first? The only reason you'd hit the bottom stern first, is if your stern was filled with water and your bow was still fully buoyant, pretty much. So if she does that, that suggests that that's got all the air in. But if you look at the bow, she's got that, which suggests the bow isn't one. And that we know the front part was the bit which is a flame. So, it's a question. It is a question. Richard, what makes the mystery so frustrating is we have so much info, yet except apparently the critical evidence. Some ships just vanished, like the cruiser Japan bought from France in the 1880s. Yes, some do. And there's always the Mary Celeste, just to tantalize you. But in this case, I don't know. As said, it vexes me. Cormoran's crew had an organized evacuation into boats from a ship that was not sinking under her captain. Yes, but again, if they think they're sinking, you would expect the crew to be getting off. Nutty Hyper 1. Hello, Nutty Hyper 1. I don't think I've seen you before. HMS Charlton, 1942. Sinking by U-boat in Canadian waters. Captain got full blamed. For good reason. But in Captain's eyes, why a U-boat to be this far in Canadian waters? Possibly. Vision. France's warships export industry never recovered from that. That's good. I think if there had been any major inaccurate factors in the Cormoran account, someone would have told the truth. Eventually, yes. This is why I am not sitting here going that the Cormoran crew lied. That's not been the thing. As I said, I am a bit confused how close they get and why they get so close. And I'm wondering if some of the signals from the Cormoran were interpreted as ship in distress. I don't. You see, the thing is, you have one side. You know what signals the Cormoran was sending and what they were intending them to be interpreted as. You don't know the side, the Australian, the side of HMAS Sydney. So Cormoran sending off these signals and giving off these things is one thing, but Sydney could be interpreting them as other things. Like Cormoran gives off that signal of seeing a strange ship. Well, Sydney might be interpreting that as seeing a submarine and getting closer to try and protect the merchant ship. Daniel Phillips, could a significant portion of crew have been killed by a fault or damage to the air filtration and circulation systems? Not really. They're not. They have it. It's too divided up. Just feel the Sydney's crew trying to abandon ship quickly in the Carly floats with no clear command. Smaller things to spot on the sea surface. Yes, but that's an awful lot of Carly floats, and that's an awful lot of crew, and there's an awful lot of search going on, and there's an awful lot of aircraft and ships. So, Sydney could have been readying to board and capture a Cormoran. That is what as I said earlier, that is what I think she was getting closer for. I think that's the case. But, again, it's getting down to a miles range is very, very close. Bitchin, HMS Exeter was badly damaged to River Plate. Imagine if she disappeared on the way to the Falklands. Wonder if damage was equivalent with HMAS Sydney. Well, no. Honestly, Exeter's damage is mostly surface damage. She hasn't got anything really structural done to the hull. She's got turrets out of action, but the hull's managed to be safe. Cormorant survivors were picked up closer to the shore later in the search. If Sydney had survivors, they would also be carried towards shore. William Cox, 11-inch versus 6-inch damage. Yeah. 6-inch at very, very close range. Very, very close range. Right. I'm going to say I'm going to finish this at about 9 o'clock because I'm going to take the fluffy research assistant for his evening preamble. Thunderkama, how far away from the Cormorant did the Sydney sink? Let me have a look. See, Burnett. Mm. $10 away. So Sydney's found 10 nautical miles away from the Cormorant. Or 11.4 nautical miles away. So between 10 and 11. Hang on. Yeah. Hang on, no. Every single thing I look at is puts them further away. No, the next one is 13.1. Hang on. Yeah. 11.4 nautical miles is roughly what they're going for. So, that's annoying. I don't know why you're doing that. Brilliant. So what do you teach about politics for engineering class today? Well, today I was teaching A-level politics. Thank you, Jeff Beeler. Sydney's wreck was located 26 to 14 degrees 13 south, 11 degrees 12.1240 east at 2,468 meters down low, 11.4 miles southeast of the radar. Take care, William Cox, and a nice dinner. The bow of a cruiser had broken off as the cruiser ship sunk. It's located at the opposite end of a debris field, stretching less than 500 meters northwest from Hull, which was sitting up. It's a lot of interesting things. I don't know. Halo politics. Yet another first at Tuesday. Yeah, that was fun today. The Labour Party decided to completely rewrite A-level politics in the UK for me a bit. It's always fun. Aviator Enterprise. If the bow is that close to the wreck in the depth of water, would it have separated after the ship was already submerged, similar to the Titanic? Possibly. Take care, Thomas Fardaway. Enjoy your tea. There are, as I said, there's lots of things which you see. The thing I wonder is that they think they're seeing the Cormoran crew think they're seeing fires and starlight going off at night, but I'm wondering if they're seeing people firing off things like very lights, etc., to try and gather survivors together. Because I'm wondering if If it does have damage it does, perhaps it sinks earlier than we presume. That's the thing, and it glides on the water further. And it's not above the water for as long. But it just vexes me, the story. It does. Vision, what is A-level politics? As an American, I only now know politics as political politics. It's about administration and government works. It's high school. It's it's the 18-year-olds. That's the thing. I'm wondering if it was actually, rather than them thinking it was flashes of fire, if it was distress flares to try and get survivors together. And she goes down more quickly. Rather than her disappearing over the horizon, steaming off, she sinks and glides further underwater. But I don't know. Jebula, where do O levels come in? They're what we now call GCSEs. They're the 16-year-olds. What I was teaching today. It's always good to have it with you, just in case. Trent McCarroll, okay. Are there any battleship wrecks that are resting upright and still have their turrets? I think there are one or two. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think I have seen some pictures of them before. Vision, our school system in the States is so different from UK and other nations. Different language, too. Yes. Nations separated by a common language. That is what the Anglosphere is. Yeah, I expect the ship shuttles at Stark or Flow would have their turrets intact. They would have done, yes. I'm not sure how many weren't pulled up for scrap metal, but you know. Vision, Arizona still has a turret. Some, I think. Of course, Pearl Harbor only 40 feet deep. Yeah. Tom Fanover, we don't even have a common language here. We're taught French and German besides native tongue. Ooh, fun. It's nice to have a variety of linguistics taught. But no, it's an interesting story. So the Amphion class as a whole have a very storied career, and I wish they got more attention because they certainly deserve more attention for what they do. Jeff Miller, 6 Lockheed Hudson aircraft from number 14 Squadron Roller Australian Air Force, based at Royal Strait Base, Perth, begin a search for the ship on the morning of 24th November. Air searches commence in the Java Sea. And then they come closer. Dunricano, it seems to be too close, but could they have been separated enough that the currents could have taken two survivor groups away from each other? That's a theoretical possibility. Unlikely in oceanic current terms, but it's a possibility, always. Vision, HMAS Victoria still has her 10-inch tail gun pointing straight up to the surface. Wreck is vertical, like a skyscraper. Cool. I was asking, all German battleships left in Scapa are currently keel up. Cruisers are laying on their board. Good to have proper book just next on my desk. Excellent. Thank you for the answer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Stream is healthy. Most stories are messy, nutty, hyper one, that have a whole lot of what if in them. It's interesting to seem to have. Right. Dan Freeman, pre-dreadnoughts did not take into account below surface damage control needs. Well, hence lost lots in Dardanelles. Yeah. Mines. It's always fun, mines. They always cause the fun. Dan Freeman, carbon monoxide poisoning from contaminated air from engine exhaust going into the air circuits. That would certainly affect the crew if it were to happen that way. Vision, just type in HMAS Victoria and her date of launch on Google. Her loss was a big help to building better ships in the RN. Had a Titanic-like board of acquiring experiments. Yep. There is various options for what happened to the poor Sydney, but I do think... Well, let's put it this way. I am not entirely convinced we have yet an accurate understanding of what happened to her. I think we have a very plausible explanation, but it doesn't feel like the right explanation to me at the moment. I might be wrong. I could well be wrong, but they're a class which does so much. I think it behoves us to give them to do a lot of make sure we are right beyond reasonable, beyond leveled up. Dan Freeman, mines are shockingly effective when you look at them. Both the number of ships lost in Model 1 and Model 2 and the efforts needed to do mine sweeping and hampering operations. Yes, and the sheer number of them. Jeffy, I think the lighter Carly floats and lifeboats were blown farther out to sea beyond the searchers. Possibly. That's good. I don't know if there are any Japanese submarines in the area, possibly torpedoed, but Japanese. No, I don't think there were Japanese submarines in the area. It's blooming unlikely for them to get there. Good ghost story concerning the Admiral on Victoria 2. His wet ghost reportedly walked through his wife's dinner party at the time of the sinking. Ugh. Rather cruel. That's going to ruin the rug. It's terrible for you to walk through like that. But, if you're going to tell the wife you're going to be late for dinner. Anyway, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, as always, for all the subscribers. Thank you, as always, for all the people who are patrons. Thank you to everyone who's pressed the little bell button down there because they want to hear more. I will be announcing on Sunday what November's schedule has been. I know it's been late, but I've had a lot of weird work turn up in October, and it's just delayed everything in terms of me putting it together. I've made a decision, but actually turning into proper slides and making sure it all works and putting it together has taken a while. That's good. Though all this is just theory crafting without any real evidence. That is the problem. The only real evidence you'll get is if you go back in time and you can watch it. JVL, this is the first time I've looked at the new details. Cool. Take care, Rodrigo Vega. Abazaski, take care. Yogi Khan, thank you. Take care. St. Kitts, thank you. I'm glad you've had a nice evening. Donnergaima, pleasure. Take care. John Shea, take care. Sean Mack, have fun. Dan Freeman, have fun. The tragedy for a ship to turn out to be lost for the same reason as Sydney, and we didn't try to make sure we addressed it. Yeah. Thank you, William Bolts. Thank you, Jeff Beeler. Dirt Squad, thank you. And DGB40, thank you. Hello and thank you. Don't find well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.